I Testify is about testifying of what Jesus Christ has done and can do in each of our lives. Through testimony of people just like you and through study of His Word, our prayer is to encourage each follower of Christ to be a light in this world. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16.
Hi friends, and welcome to another episode of I Testify. We have with us our friend Carissa, who's just beginning her second year of the chaplaincy program at Loma Linda University. And she's going to be sharing with us some of the experiences she's had while being in the chaplaincy program with patients, as well as a brief study on where is God in times of darkness. So thank you for joining us, Carissa. And why don't you start with, how did you end up getting into the chaplaincy program?
Good question. It's definitely been quite a journey for me. My background is in ministry. I was in full-time ministry for about 5 years, and I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it and wanted to continue along those lines. I also have a background in social work, so trying to see how do I include counseling and ministry and what would that look like together, and that opened the door for chaplaincy.
Brings a different element to the social gospel.
Sure. Fair. Very fair.
Fair. Okay, so then you wanted to incorporate ministry into your education, so you took it another level. But why chaplaincy?
You know, I really appreciate about the former ministry I worked with for about 5 years that, you know, I was up front speaking and sharing and teaching, and I appreciated that. I enjoyed the experience, but I also missed the one-on-one connection. And there's something about chaplaincy where you are beside someone's bedside in one of the most vulnerable times of their life, period, that they've never experienced before. It's a scary time, it's a painful time, there's so many dynamics involved. And so being able to just come close to them during that time in a very personal moment was just a beautiful thought for me. And I also have an interest in foreign evangelism and going overseas. And so this was, I thought, a good training ground as I proceed in that way.
I do agree that it seems that most people are more receptive to God when they hit a rock bottom point, and there's nothing rock bottom more than when you're at death's door.
Absolutely.
So you have a great opportunity, and you have that background in ministry to really cultivate that relationship with God, even their final moments of their life. So how's your experience been so far?
It has been incredible, terrifying, wonderful, humbling, just all of these things somewhat encapsulated in that experience.
Okay.
I know that, you know, when I first was starting off chaplaincy and I was talking with my director about, okay, well, how do you respond when someone's dying? What do you say to the family? What do you say when you're beside the infant who will never go home, who will never be on daddy's basketball team as he's dreamt? You know, what do you say? How do you respond? And I'm asking my educator this, and he's saying, you know, just be there. Just be present. God will give you the words. I thought, no, I like a plan. Like, give me a strategy. Right. I want a plan. I want to know what to say. They say this, I say that. They say this, I do that. But that's not chaplaincy. It's being present, it's being real, it's being available, and it's realizing that I don't have the answer. There's no way to fix it. There's no way to just make it pretty. This is death. This is a painful situation. And yet being able to show God in the midst of that.
So do you find yourself listening more often than talking in these situations, or some of these situations?
Absolutely. I'm learning the power of silence because often in our lives, you know, even when we're having a conversation with a friend, people don't like silence. Silence is scary, certainly on camera. It's very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
Are you trying to get me to say something?
It's very uncomfortable, and that's why we're using all these filler words or whatever. We cannot handle silence. And yet, how often when I go to a patient's bedside and I might greet them, and they might initially seem somewhat shut off to me, or maybe they'll share a little bit, but then they close up. And to just stand there with them in silence or sit with them in silence for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it depends on the situation. And then they often open up after that, or you'll notice the tears coming down their face as they're crying, and they really just needed someone to be there and present and show, hey, I care in the moment.
Wow.
And then they're able to open up further and explore further. So
Wow.
it's, yeah.
Silence is a communication tool.
Absolutely.
I think it is with God too. And I've had this kind of, I don't know, epiphany or not, but I remember when I first became a Christian, I realized that when my natural tendency when I was driving in my car was to have music on, constantly music, and everyone around me music, and it made me realize, like, what's it like to have silence, and especially when you're in a very small, vehicle where there's by yourself, there's nothing distracting around you, there's no one to talk to, and you just have to be stuck in your own thoughts. And I started to really appreciate that. And I think that I had a lot of my aha moments when I actually am in silence.
Absolutely.
Exercise is a great way to do that too, but I can't imagine the thoughts that are going through someone's head when you're in an experience wondering, why is this happening to me? And the only answers you're coming to are your own conclusions. And so having someone there that may shed some light on the experience to give them a better understanding would be very useful. But do you get to do that very much? Do you get to share the reason for the hope that's in you when you're visiting with patients?
Good question. It is very much patient-led as well. So it depends on the encounter and the situation and where they're at spiritually. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the stories that has been the most meaningful to me, and one I often go back to when I'm talking with patients, is Christ's experience in John 11, a familiar passage when he's talking with Lazarus, or actually not with Lazarus. Lazarus was in the tomb, but he's speaking with Mary and Martha. And they are just horribly upset. And they're saying, Jesus, where were you? Like, Jesus, didn't you care? Jesus, why didn't you come? And those are real human questions, and they're questions that my patients are asking, like, where is God? And I love Christ's response, where he didn't criticize them, he didn't run from them, he didn't say, where's your faith, what's wrong with you? The Bible simply says Jesus wept. Jesus came close to them, Jesus cried with them. Even though he knew that he was about to raise Lazarus, he still just came close and cried with them and said, I get it. I feel your pain. I hurt with you. And sometimes that's the most meaningful thing, is to know, sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes there's no easy answer. There's no way I can tie this up with a pretty bow. But in the midst of it, you're not alone, and that God is with you.
Was it John 11:34? 8? 5. Yeah, that's a very good illustration, actually. Very, very real that Lazarus had that death that happened. His family was there, and they were expecting someone to come who cared for him deeply and didn't show up. And and if you're expecting God to be there and give you this comfort, but you still feel this pain, you feel like God isn't there, but he is there.
Absolutely.
Even though you can't feel it. So you're supposed to try and convey that to them. How do you do that?
By providing, absolutely, trying to provide some hope or some comfort in the midst of that. And one of the things that I often rely on is metaphors. Sometimes when people can picture, it's easy to then relate it back to their life. For instance, I was speaking with one patient, and they're dealing with deep depression, especially when you get a terminal diagnosis. How do you sort through that? And we were talking about the analogy of how, if you've ever been in a really bad thunderstorm before, and all you can see is the dark clouds, all you can see is the lightning, all you can feel is the wind, and you might feel like the sun is gone, like it's no longer there. But one of my favorite authors mentions how in that moment you reach through the clouds and you grab hold of the sun. The sun is still shining, even if all we can feel, even if all we are seeing is the thunder clouds.
It's a great illustration. Yeah. The sun is still shining, even in the midst of the darkness.
Faith.
Yes.
A lot of faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
It must have been such a big difference for you to go from that ministry in front of hundreds upon hundreds and then thousands of people sometimes, and then going into this one room with this one other person. How did you deal with that?
I actually had someone talk to me one time when they found out I was making that transition, and they said, you're wasting the gift God's given you. Here you're speaking to hundreds or whatever it might be, and now you're just going to be with one person at a time? Basically, what a waste. And as I reflect on the ministry of Jesus Christ, so much of his ministry was done with one person, just one person at a time, whether it's 3 a.m. in the garden late at night, just that one person that he was willing to invest in. And I think that that's the core. You know, for many people, you know, we want to walk in the footsteps of Christ, and often we think, okay, that means going to the Holy Land and walking through Jerusalem and getting that experience. But one of my favorite authors mentions in Ministry of Healing that if you want to walk in the footsteps of Christ, walk in the hospital, walk between the hospital beds, because that's where Christ is at. Yeah. And so in many ways, I think that's been a beautiful transition for me, just being able to extend that visible presence of Christ to someone in need.
Yeah.
So do you have any experiences you'd like to share about maybe while you were interacting with some of these patients? Might be helpful to get a better understanding about what you do and what they're going through.
Absolutely. A picture of what it looks like. There's been quite a few experiences, and that's one of the things I appreciate about chaplaincy is no patient is the same. Every single scenario, every single encounter is so different. But you'll have instances such as, you know, what do you say when you walk into the room of a woman that was shot in the face with a shotgun by the man who once said, "I love you"?
Wow.
What do you say? How do you respond in that situation? What do you say when the kids are there and daddy's not coming home? How do you respond in those moments, or when they've received the terminal diagnosis? And so there's been some difficult moments. I remember one in particular, speaking with a gentleman, and he quite literally and figuratively had the blood of his passenger on his hands. And he's lying there in the hospital bed, and of course he's going to be going to a detention facility. And so you're helping him connect and process that, and, you know, again, quite literally the blood's still on his hands. So these are very fresh and raw experiences that they're processing through.
And experiences also that you can probably more often not relate to than relate to. These are experiences that, I mean,
Right.
you're maybe not going to have, probably not going to have. So I think what you said before is just to be walking in the footsteps of Christ, basically being a vessel, because there's really nothing that you in and of yourself can relate to, but he can.
Absolutely. And I think that's key. One of the most hurtful things you could say to a patient in that situation is, "Oh, I understand completely. Oh, I've been there, I get it." Or really, not even just to a patient, to any of us, when you're going through a time of hardship.
Right.
But yet to be able to first listen, and then secondarily being able to connect them with someone who does get it, someone who does understand our deepest and our darkest moments.
Yeah.
I had an instance one time where I was walking in to speak with a patient who had just gone through a tragic car accident, and it was a very difficult scenario. And as I go in to connect with her, and I called her name, and she kind of rolled over on her bed to face me, and she was quite anxious and sobbing and waiting to hear the news of whether or not her loved one had survived. And as we were talking together, and by the way, I knew that her loved one had not, but she had yet to be informed. And so for many reasons, as they're working through her own health issues. But as I'm ministering to her, and as we're sharing from some of the promises of the Word of God, and we were praying together, and as I started to then say goodbye and to leave, she stopped me and she said, "You know, when I was lying there in my bed, I was praying that God would send me an angel and just show me that somebody cares." And then she heard me call her name. It's like, you know what? God does care. God does hear those prayers.
And his timing is perfect.
His timing is perfect. Absolutely. Absolutely.
How does the schooling work in the classes? Were you sent out right away to hospitals and to patient rooms?
Fairly quickly on into the program, about 6 months or so into the program, we began some of our clinicals. And it's really a blessing because we're working underneath the chaplains there at the hospital, and they are just God-fearing, dedicated men and women. And I just appreciate their humble spirit and how much they teach us and guide us in the process.
Very interesting. Now, you did want to do a study, and we're very excited to have this study and to I guess talk more and discuss more about these overarching concepts. So we'll give you the floor.
Okay. You know, one of the things that really stood out to me was a text in Hebrews 5. You can turn there, Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 7. Again, as I'm just like wrestling with this concept, because I'm in the patient room and I'm trying to be present with them, but these are questions I have to answer from my own heart as well.
Right.
When I am praying for them to go home, when I am praying for that discharge to come, when I'm praying for a healing of sorts, and then it doesn't happen. What does that look like? Where is God in the midst of that? So one of the verses that I've appreciated as I've been exploring this personally for myself as well is Hebrews 5 and verse 7.
And viewers, you can also, we would love for you to open your Bibles and turn with us and study with us. Hebrews 5:7. Reed's favorite book.
It is.
Well, do you want to read it for us then, Reed?
Sure. Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. Can I read verse 8? Because it's like...
Please.
And though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey.
Amen.
Very meat-packed few verses there, but
Yeah.
But what are your initial thoughts?
Goodness, as I see your Bible, I want to learn more about your thoughts here.
Oh.
All that
Yeah.
those verses mean to you. But one of the things that really stands out to me in this passage is here Jesus, it says that he was crying out vehement cries and tears to the one who is able to save him from death. And when you think about when was it that Christ was crying out with tears, and this isn't just like, oh, that was sad. He is just bleeding. He is crying out. And of course, our minds go back to when he's in the garden.
Gethsemane.
He's in Gethsemane, and he's crying out for deliverance. Lord, please, if it's your will, take away this cup, but if not. And here the Bible says he was heard. His cry for deliverance was heard, but was he delivered from that death?
No.
No, he wasn't. He went through with that death, but that knowledge that God still heard your cry. God still heard your prayer. And he answers in maybe different ways, but he definitely answers. I think for me, it also connects with the story of the paralytic, the one who came through the roof. I think it's in Luke 5, if I'm not mistaken. And how when he came down and it was before Jesus, and Jesus turned to him and said, "Son, be of good cheer, your sins are forgiven you." And the first time I read or was reflecting on that passage, I should say, I was like, here he is paralyzed, and he comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, "Okay, be of good cheer, you're forgiven." You think, well, that's not what he wanted, right? He came because he wants to walk again. He came because he wants to be physically healed. And yet God actually knew what his greatest desire was. His greatest need in that moment was actually not the physical healing. His greatest desire, his greatest need was that emotional and spiritual healing. And I have to also remember that with my patients as I'm praying with them for that healing, recognizing that God does give healing every single time. It may not be physical healing here in the temporal, but we're guaranteed, of course, that he will provide the healing of spiritual and emotional. Maybe it's reconciliation with family members, or forgiveness that you might need to ask for, or even forgiveness in your relationship with God. And sometimes that bitterness that may come when you have a terminal diagnosis. So God does bring healing, though maybe in different ways than we anticipate.
Yeah, I think that's such an important concept of emotional healing connected with physical healing. Because as you guys know, my husband is a physical therapist, and more often than not, his title says physical therapy, physical healing. But more often than not, every patient that he sees, he has to do a certain amount of emotional healing as well. It's always connected for him. And I remember the story, just not to go into it, but just very briefly to say, one time, he literally just sat and talked with his patient for the entire visit. So that's like 45 minutes of just talking through the story. I don't even think they did one exercise. And at the end, the patient got up and said, I feel much better. I don't feel as much pain.
Wow.
Physical pain with whatever body part it was. But that just struck me when you were saying, you know, a lot of our pain, our physical pain, is connected to the source of emotional pain or mental pain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we see that a lot with patients, you know, not necessarily to give specifics, but in situations where they may have lost their family through tragic reasons, and then shortly thereafter they're diagnosed with cancer or whatever it might be. And of course, there is definitely that connection between the emotional stress and pressures and such, and then our physical health as well.
Powerful. Though he were
Was there another Bible verse?
One of the other things that really stands out to me, and that's in Isaiah chapter 43. Isaiah 43 is one I share quite a bit with patients as well. And it's always been something very meaningful to me, but it certainly strikes me in a different way because I had the opportunity to read this with a patient and a family as the patient was actively dying. And so these words aren't quite the same after you've had that scenario, seeing how real it is. So it's Isaiah 43, 1, 2, 3. Should I read that, or would you like to?
I can read it.
Okay, thank you.
But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Savior. I gave Egypt for thy ransom, Ethiopia and Seba for thee.
When I read these to patients, I often insert their name because I think it's so much more meaningful when you're saying, okay, this isn't just written for those people out there, but this is for me. Where it says, fear not, Christy, because I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name, Christy, you are mine. Just knowing that God is a personal God. And yeah, when we go through the fires, I mean, he doesn't promise that we won't. We will. We do go through the fires in life, but to know that when you walk through it, you're not going to be burned. I'm going to go with you and I'm going to protect you. And in those moments where you can't walk or you can't swim, I'm the one that's going to carry you.
And you know, you can take the symbolism behind it, which is, you know, that you can say a literal fire being burned, or there's the trial of our faith, which is also a fire. And so we will be tried through our experiences, but we will come out refined through those experiences. That's why it says, though he were son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And then you have Daniel, who literally, and we'll actually use his 3 friends, who went through the fire in the fiery furnace, and they literally weren't burned. And you would think that they were actually thinking of this exact verse when they were ready to go and be burned for their faith. And that would be a suffering experience where they voluntarily went into that experience. A lot of times we go through experiences where if we could choose, we would say, I don't want to actually have my father die. I don't want to be in a car accident. I don't want to be abandoned or hurt.
Yeah.
And we're just left to go through it. We can't see where it's going to lead. And God makes the best of bad situations. But it's for our own good at times. Sometimes I do believe bad things just happen because bad things happen. But God makes the best of them.
Absolutely.
But we're burned, or we could say we go through a trial, a fiery furnace trial of our own. And God says, although it may feel like you're going to be burned, you're going to get through it okay. But you have to hold on. And a lot of times people don't necessarily know that they should be holding on to anything. So that's where you come in and you share with them things like this.
And that's one of the desires when we're talking with patients, trying to understand what is their source of strength. How is it that they cope and work through things like this in their past? And sometimes patients will say, I have nothing. I don't have a source of strength. You know, that's fair. That's reality.
Yeah.
But then being able to share with them at some point, 2 Corinthians 12:9, one of my favorite passages, about how my grace is enough for you and my strength is made perfect in weakness. So God's strength can't be made perfect until we recognize we are weak. So being able to say, you know what, that's that's okay. In this moment when you feel that weakness, that's when God can show his strength.
I think with a lot of people, and this is me speculating, but I think it holds some validity to it, but I think a lot of people don't have strength that they go to, but they have coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people turn to television and media because it suppresses the feelings, the pain they're going through. But then once it's done, they're left with the same problem. They
Right.
just live it again. But when you have God in your life,
Yes.
you actually have something that gives you hope, encouragement, but healing.
Absolutely.
Where you don't get that from the world. You don't
Right.
get that from other sources.
God is not a coping mechanism.
Exactly.
Right, and those other sources can often be even more destructive if
Right.
they do cope with drinking or whatever it might be, and then they come back to the scenario and it's worse than it was before. But with God, of course, it's beautiful healing.
I actually thought that when I became Christian, or before I became Christian, my parents took more of a grasp on Christianity in my late teens, and I thought that this desire to learn about Christianity and to implement it was a coping mechanism. I really did. I was like, oh well,
Yeah.
it's like a comfort blanket. That's how I looked at it. And until I actually got to know God for myself, did I realize, oh no, this is real
Yes, it is.
and
Transformative power.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that's most precious to me is when I'm going to a patient room and they might be having an anxiety attack or just real concerns, real fears. And to then, as we pray together and we talk together, just sense this incredible peace, knowing that God is there. And, after the prayer, like they're acknowledging that they feel that there is that presence of God there. And it just makes such a difference to know that God is tangible and God is present. He's not a distant God, but he's a relational God who truly does heal.
As you brought up this verse, and there was a verse in Psalms 116:13 that says, I will take the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. And it just struck me in comparison to Isaiah 43 that he's calling us, or he's calling you personally. At the same time, we're calling him, and so it's like a call and response. And so it just struck me that it goes along with the fact that, hey, this is like a tangible God. It's someone where you call out and he calls back, and he, in fact, loves you. He loved you first, and he loves you even when you perhaps didn't even know him or love him.
Absolutely. He extends that love and that call first. Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that I often share with patients is a story from Corrie ten Boom. If you've ever read her book, The Hiding Place.
I just gave it to someone.
Ah, okay. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And one of the things I appreciated about it is she shares the story about how her father said, when you're trying to help me carry my suitcase and it's too strong for you, and he says, it's like with God, like sometimes there are things that are too big for you to carry, and those are the things you give to God. And I think in our experience as well, there are some things too big for us, and God says, I'll carry that burden for you.
Strength made perfect in weakness. Thank you so much, Carissa, for coming and being vulnerable and sharing these experiences that you've had. And we thank you also for watching. Join us next time on iTestify. God bless.